Some Ukrainian troops do not want a peace deal with Russia at any price, even though they desperately need more Western military aid. A Ukrainian military officer who says he maintains contact with more than 40 brigades told the Associated Press on condition of anonymity and ahead of upcoming talks. The ammunition stocks that we have now will last for 2 to 3 weeks, maybe a month. We definitely cannot cope with this on our own, he said. Another servicewoman from the 53rd Brigade of the Ukrainian Armed Forces fighting in eastern Ukraine was skeptical about the negotiations between US and Russian presidents Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. In her opinion, the war can only be ended by force. If dialogue is one way to influence the situation, then let them talk, but let it be meaningful enough so that we feel the results of these negotiations. The conditions are unacceptable to everyone. What we propose does not work for them, and what they propose is unacceptable to us. That is why I, like probably every soldier here, believe that this can only be resolved by force. Let us recall that, as the Financial Times wrote, citing Ukrainian and Western high-ranking officials, Trump and Putin will probably try to agree on a ceasefire in Ukraine by Easter, April the 20th, or by May the 9th. After Donald Trump launched direct peace talks with Moscow, bypassing Kiev and European allies, the Russian president is now closer than ever to getting what he wanted from his 3-year invasion, the newspaper warned. Recall President Donald Trump's announcement of talks with Russia has given Russian dictator Vladimir Putin what he has long demanded: direct talks with the United States on Ukraine. As the Wall Street Journal writes, the Kremlin has long tried to exclude Ukraine and its European allies from such negotiations. Moscow has hinted that Washington is responsible for prolonging the war, so only it can negotiate with Russia to end it. But if we are guided by Putin's stated positions on Ukraine, then the negotiations promised by Trump will be long and drawn out. Russia will agree to a ceasefire only if the US stops supporting Ukraine and restrictions are imposed on its ability to defend its territory, the publication wrote. As the Wall Street Journal noted, analysts say Putin is willing to play the long game to get the US to strike a hard bargain on his terms. Military experts added that Russia could continue to fight Ukraine for at least another year and a half with the manpower and weapons it has. This is an interim victory for now. Putin's ultimate victory is to ensure that Ukraine does not fall into the Western camp and is not deprived of the opportunity to make sovereign choices about its security measures, said Alexander Gaboev, director of the Carnegie Eurasia Center in Berlin. Meanwhile, there was jubilation in the Kremlin. Putin has won a victory over everyone, said leading Russian propagandist Olga Skabieva, and the popular tabloid Komsomolskaya Pravda wrote that Trump has signed Zelenski's death warrant. Russia has released an American teacher imprisoned over what his family said was prescribed medical marijuana, but several other Americans remain in Russian custody. Teacher Mark Fogel was released in what the White House described Tuesday as a diplomatic thaw. Fogel was arrested in August 2021 and is serving a 14-year prison sentence on drug charges. He was designated by President Joe Biden's administration as wrongfully detained in December. Fogel's release follows a massive prisoner swap last August that resulted in the release of Wall Street Journal reporter Ivan Gershkovich and corporate security executive Paul Whelan, among others. Here is a look at other Americans who remain in Russian custody. Ksenia Kavana, the US-Russian dual national, was arrested in Yekaterinburg in January 2024 on treason charges, accused of giving a donation to a charity aiding Ukraine. She was sentenced in August to 12 years in prison. She obtained US citizenship after marrying an American and was on a family visit from Los Angeles when arrested. Rights activists said the charges stem from a $51 donation to a US charity that helps Ukraine. Stephen Hubbard, the Michigan native, was convicted of fighting alongside Ukraine's military as a mercenary against Russia and sentenced to 6 years and 10 months in October 2024. Prosecutors said in the closed trial that Hubbard had signed a contract with Ukraine's military shortly after Russian troops invaded in February 2022 and that he fought with the Ukrainian side until being captured 2 months later. Hubbard, who was 72 at the time of his conviction, was the first American known to have been convicted of fighting for Ukraine in the conflict. Travis Leak, the musician, was convicted on drug charges and sentenced to 13 years in prison in July 2024. An Instagram page described him as the singer for the band Lovey Knock Sees the Night. News reports said he is a former paratrooper with the US military and had lived in Moscow since 2010. Gordon Black, an Army Staff Sergeant, Black was convicted in June 2024 in Vladivostok of stealing and making threats against his girlfriend and was sentenced to 3 years and 9 months in prison. He had flown to Russia from his post in South Korea without authorization and was arrested in May after she accused him of stealing from her, according to US and Russian authorities. Robert Woodland, a Russia-born US citizen, was convicted of drug trafficking in July 2024 and sentenced to 12.5 years in prison. Russian media reported that his name matches a US citizen interviewed in 2020 who said he was born in the Perm region in 1991 and adopted by an American couple at age 2. He said he traveled to Russia to find his mother and eventually met her on a TV show. David Barnes, an engineer from Texas, Barnes was arrested in 2022 while visiting his sons in Russia, where their mother had taken them. His supporters say the woman made baseless claims of sexual abuse that already had been discredited by Texas investigators, but a Russian court in February 2024 convicted him on those claims anyway and sentenced him to 21 years in prison. Robert Gilman, identified in the media as a former US Marine, Gilman was arrested in 2022 for allegedly assaulting a police officer after a drunken disturbance on a train. He was initially handed a 3.5-year sentence, then allegedly attacked a prison inspector during a cell check and was sentenced in October 2024 to 7 years and 1 month in prison. Eugene Spector, a Russian-born US citizen in prison on bribery charges, Spector was handed a second 15-year term for espionage in December 2024. Spector, formerly an executive at a medical equipment company in Russia, was previously sentenced to 3.5 years in prison in September 2022 for enabling bribes to a Russian government official. Joseph Tatar. Tatar was arrested in August 2024 at an upscale Moscow hotel after failing to provide documents showing that he entered the country legitimately. At a police station, he allegedly attacked an officer. He has been in custody awaiting trial on assaulting a law officer, which carries a sentence of up to 5 years. At a September court hearing, Tatar claimed he came to Russia to seek political asylum and that he was being persecuted by the CIA. A senior officer of the Communications Department of the 80th Separate Airborne Assault Brigade of Ukraine, Senior Sergeant Petro Haidashchuk, noted that settlements in the Kursk region, which are controlled by the armed forces of Ukraine and where Russians live, are being destroyed by the Russian army. He said this on the air of the Espresso TV channel. At the beginning of the Kursk operation, in the first 2 or 3 weeks, the Russians did not use aviation and guided aerial bombs so actively on their settlements, which are under the control of the armed forces of Ukraine. Over time, the activity of guided aerial bombs and artillery increased. We see that Russian settlements, which are under our control, where Russians live, that is, the civilian population, are being destroyed by the Russian army, Haidashchuk noted. According to the senior officer of the Communications Department of the 80th Separate Airborne Assault Brigade, the Russian army does not disdain to drop aerial bombs on the buildings of its citizens and shell villages in the Kursk region with artillery. We received videos from the Russians themselves who went to storm settlements under our control. That is, the Russian soldiers themselves were surprised that their army was shelling and destroying Russian villages, emphasized Haidashchuk. Recall there have been numerous reports over the last year of incidents of Russian aircraft accidentally dropping bombs and missiles on Russian civilian areas around border regions with Ukraine. In recent days, nearly 50% of Russian guided aerial bombs have been hitting not Ukraine but Russia's Kursk region. This was stated by military journalist Vladislav Zeleznov in a comment to the Kyiv 24 TV channel. The city of Sudza and its suburbs are suffering because Russian pilots are dropping 250 and 500 kilogram guided aerial bombs on Russia's sovereign territory, he said. According to him, Russian President Vladimir Putin is entirely unconcerned about the so-called collateral losses caused by such actions of the Russian army. He doesn't care how many civilians in Kursk region, Russians themselves, will be killed and how many buildings and infrastructure will be destroyed, the expert said. Likewise, the Kremlin leader pays no attention to the losses among the North Korean military personnel deployed in Kursk region to fight against Ukraine. The Russian General Staff is using them as expendable assault troops who perish in the very first battle. In the past, the Russian army used former convicts in this manner. Before that, Wagner fighters fought this way. Now it's the turn of the North Korean soldiers. They attack and try to capture positions. If they succeed, Russian troops take their place. If not, new groups of North Korean soldiers are sent in. The military journalist described Russia's tactics in the Kursk region.